Week 10, we're looking at the quarterbacks here, guys who have better than normal matchups that you might want to consider putting into your lineup if they are kind of on the borderline of that yay nay conversation on a weekly basis. Who do we like this week?
Brock Purdy. I don't think he'll score 80 points, but he might score 30 for you this week against the Buccaneers. 17 plus points in 3 straight games, including 2 with more than 24, including a game against the Cowboys where he had 26. The Buccaneers, their defense has allowed 24 plus points to each of their last 3 quarterbacks that they have faced. So this is a great spot for Brock Purdy. And also Sam Darnold against the Jaguars. Now, Darnold's not putting up bonkers numbers, but he's consistently in the mid to high teens, which is very good. He had 19 last week. The Jaguars have allowed 18 plus fantasy points to 7 different quarterbacks this season, and 6 of them have scored more than 20. So this is a good spot for Sam I like Darnold as a top 10 option this week, Lindsay.
Yeah. All right. Who's moving in the other direction? Who do we not like this week because of their matchup?
So Aaron Rodgers has been better lately. He's averaging right around 17 points in the last 3 games with Devontae Adams, but I don't love the matchup against the Cardinals. Their defense has gotten better. In their last 3 games, they've held Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, and Caleb Williams all to fewer than 15 points. So Rodgers is a bit of a risk this week. Superflex, obviously, you play him. And then speaking of Caleb Williams, this isn't even about the matchup, about the Patriots. It's not. He's been terrible. In his last 2 games, his completion percentage is 47.7. They've got to turn things around. I don't know if that coaching staff is going to be there very long.
At the running back position, who do we like this week?
We'll go to the J.K. Dobbins. Well, I didn't love him last week. He had a very good game against Cleveland. The Titans defense has allowed 20 plus points to a running backs in 2 straight games, including Ramondre Stevenson, who had a couple of touchdowns against them last week. So J.K. Dobbins is a stardom. And how about Tyrone Tracy out in Germany? Carolina's defense has allowed 8 running backs to score 17 plus points, including 6 who've had more than 20. So Tyrone Tracy is a very, very nice play this weekend overseas.
Who are we sitting?
With 4 teams off, I guess sit and beware are more of the talking points here. Tony Pollard. And Tony Pollard's been very good this year. The Chargers, their defense has been pretty tough. Just 2 running backs have beaten them for more than 16.2 points, and they've held Najee Harris, Chuba Hubbard, Kareem Hunt, and Javonte Williams, and Nick Chubb to under 14 points. So I know you're going to play Pollard, but maybe temper your expectations. And speaking of Javonte Williams, last week he had 10 points. We kind of thought it would be bad. I mean, it was mid, it was okay, whatever. But the Chiefs are they are kryptonite to running backs. This defense is unbelievable, Lindsay. They have not allowed a running back to score more than 13.2 points against them this year. Not one. And so Javonte Williams, who also might lose some touches. Remember, we talked about that earlier in the week. Audric Estime may get some more burn.
Wide receivers, who are we starting?
Brian Thomas Jr., only because Trevor Lawrence is not going to play this week. He's unlikely to play. And he didn't have a good game last week. But again, you've got 4 teams on a bye. And even with Mac Jones under center, this is still a good matchup against the Vikings. No defense in the league has allowed more fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and perimeter receivers have averaged the 2nd most points against them. And Lindsay mentioned earlier, negative game script. They may have to throw the football. So I'm still going to play Brian Thomas Jr. And Jalen Waddle, he's been awful. He had the craziest stat line last week. He had negative 4 yards and a touchdown. He's only the 3rd wide receiver in the history of the NFL to have negative receiving yards and still score a touchdown. And he's been bad almost all year long. But again, 4 teams on a bye, and the Rams defense has allowed the 4th most points per game to the perimeter. Hopefully, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill will emerge from their statistical funks and give us some points in a game with a high total.
How are we sitting?
Marvin Harrison Jr., first off, single digits in 4 of his last 5 games, had a 3.4 point stinker last week. Now he's got the Jets, and their defense has allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers and the 4th fewest to the perimeter. And then Michael Pittman Jr. Now we thought that when Flacco came back, this is good for Pittman. Josh Downs, I think Josh Downs is certainly now the better fantasy option in Indianapolis in terms of the wide receiver. But look at Pittman's numbers. Single digits in 3 straight games. He scored fewer than 3 points in each of his last 2. And now he's got Buffalo. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to enemy wide receivers this year. And perimeter receivers, 5th fewest points on average when facing the Bills. So this is not a good spot for Michael Pittman Jr. All right, dirtbags, let's talk about other ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about Prize Picks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks.
You can turn your hot takes into cash, Fabs. Listen here to figure out which players have the best matchups of the week. We always talk about guys that we like more or less depending on their matchup. Then take that information and flip on over to Prize Picks. See if you think that those players that we talked about will have more or less than the numbers that they have attached to them. It could be number of catches. It could be number of yards. It could be number of touchdowns. You can do it all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick and easy. And if you have a strong take about a guy that you don't have on your fantasy team, this is the place to put that take to work for you. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code FANTASYDIRT and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FANTASYDIRT on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's like free money, guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Tight ends. Let's move on to that position group now. And some guys that we like a little bit better than usual this week at that position.
And this is validation. Start Jake Ferguson. Don't worry that it's not Dak. Cooper Rush is going to have to throw to somebody. Chances are the Cowboys are going to get their asses kicked in this game, and they're going to have to throw the football. Ferguson still is a very much a big part of this offense, and maybe even more so now. CeeDee Lamb is a little bit banged up. And the matchup isn't even great against the Eagles, but I don't care. I'm looking at volume. I'm expecting targets in this game. Start Jake Ferguson and start Dalton Kincaid. He's been a disappointment, Lindsay, this year, right? I mean, The thing is, he's seeing a lot of targets, though. He's had 10 last week. He's had no fewer than 6 in his last 6 games, and the Colts have allowed 5 tight ends to beat them for at least 12.4 points this year, including 4 with more than 16 and 2 who have gone over 20. So even though Kincaid has not been great, I'm still starting him. It's a plus matchup, and he's getting targeted.
Who are we not starting?
Sam Laporta. And I get it. It's hard not to play him. I understand 4 teams on a bye, but J-Mo's going to be back this week. And listen to this. He has failed to score double digits in all but 2 games. This is the number 1 tight end in fantasy football from last year. He had 4.8 points last week. Houston has been very good against tight ends. In fact, only 2 have beat them for more than 7.2 points. And no tight end has scored more than 13 against them. So this is a bad matchup for Sam Laporta. And in that same game, Dalton Schultz, I'm out. Last week, they didn't have Nico and they didn't have Stephon Diggs, and he still didn't do anything. He hasn't scored double digits all year long. He's averaging 5.6 points per game, and the Lions haven't allowed a tight end to beat them for more than 10.7 points this season. That is a recipe for fantasy destruction. Sit Dalton Schultz.